The village of Valleybrook, nestled among endless fields and dense forests, lived a quiet, slow-paced life. Here, time flowed lazily, like a river on a hot summer day, and every resident knew each other by face. The houses, leaning with age, lined the only street, surrounded by lush gardens. The air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass, chimney smoke, and the sweet aroma of apples beginning to ripen on the trees. In this village, at its farthest edge, lived the Miller family. Mary and Benjamin Miller were unusual people. Their home, surrounded by a high fence of gray planks, looked more like a fortress than a house. Beyond the fence was a sprawling garden, and further on, a large yard where a herd of goats grazed. It was here, among these animals, that their 5-year-old son Luke grew up. Mary was 46 but looked older. Her face, weathered by wind and sun, was etched with fine wrinkles, and her hands, rough from constant work, seemed carved from wood. Mary wore long skirts and shawls she knitted herself. She was a stern woman, but her eyes shone with a deep, almost fanatical love for her son. She believed that nature was the best teacher and that goats were perfect educators. Benjamin, her husband, was 30 years older. Tall and stooped, he had a gray beard and a piercing gaze. Benjamin rarely spoke, preferring to express his thoughts through actions. He was convinced that the modern world corrupted children and had decided to shield Luke from its influence. Goats, in his opinion, were pure, innocent creatures that could teach the boy everything he needed to know about life. "Goats are wisdom," he once told a neighbor who had come to borrow salt. "They don't deceive. They don't betray. They live in harmony with nature. What could be better for a child?" To Luke, the goats weren't just animals. They were his family, his friends, and his teachers. Every morning, he would run out into the yard, where the herd was already waiting for him. The goats greeted him with cheerful bleats, and he, laughing, would throw himself at them, hugging their necks and kissing their furry foreheads. "Mama goat," he would say to the oldest goat, whom he called Daisy. "What are we doing today?" Daisy, as if understanding him, would nudge his shoulder with her head and then lead him to the feeding trough. Luke would follow her, mimicking her gait and even her sounds. He had learned to bleat almost like them, and sometimes, if you closed your eyes, you might think it wasn't a child speaking but a little kid. His habits were strange for a 5-year-old. He drank milk straight from the bucket, dipping his face into it like the goats did. He slept in the barn, on hay, next to the animals, and when he was sad, he would lie down in the grass and look at the sky, listening to the goats chewing beside him. "He's happy," Mary would say, watching her son. "He's free. He doesn't know what evil, envy, or lies are. He lives as a human should." But not everyone in the village shared the Millers' views. John Ridge, their neighbor, was a man of strict principles. He was 50 and had worked his entire life in the city before deciding to return to the village. John was tall, sturdy, with sharp features and a cold gaze. He believed that children should grow up in civilization, go to school, and interact with other kids, not live among animals. "This isn't education," he told his wife. "This is savagery. The boy will grow up and won't be able to live among people. He'll be like an animal." John began observing Luke. He saw how the boy ran barefoot around the yard, how he ate grass, how he talked to the goats. The sight filled him with a mix of pity and anger. "He can't even speak properly," he said to Mary one day when she came out into the yard. "Have you lost your minds? He's a child, not an animal." Mary looked at him with cold calm. "He's happy, John. Isn't that what matters most? Tensions between the Millers and John grew. John started telling other villagers about how Luke was being raised. He said the boy was becoming wild, that he didn't know what a TV, books, or school were. Some agreed with him, while others shrugged, saying it wasn't their business. "A child needs an education," John insisted. "He should be among people." One day, he decided to act. He called Child Protective Services and told them about the situation. A few days later, a woman from social services arrived in the village. She inspected the Miller's home, spoke with Mary and Benjamin, and then asked to see Luke. The boy was sitting in the barn, hugging a kid. He looked at the woman with wide, frightened eyes. "What's your name?" she asked. "Luke," he whispered. "Do you want to go to school?" she asked. Luke looked at his mother, then at the kid. "I want to be with them," he said, pointing to the goats. The woman sighed. She could see the boy was healthy and cared for, but his world was limited to the yard and the herd. She promised to return in a week. News of the social services visit spread quickly through the village. Mary and Benjamin were furious. They knew John was behind it. "You want to take our son away?" Mary shouted, storming into John's yard. "You think you know better how to raise him?" John stood with his arms crossed. "I'm thinking about his future. He won't be able to live among people if he grows up like an animal." "He's happy!" Mary yelled. "He's free! You don't understand because you've never been free." John didn't respond. He just turned and walked away. A week later, the woman from social services returned. She brought a psychologist with her. They talked at length with Luke, observed his behavior. In the end, they decided the boy wasn't in danger, but recommended that the Millers send him to school. Mary and Benjamin agreed, but only to homeschooling. They didn't want Luke to leave their home. John, upon hearing this, just shook his head. "They don't get it," he told his wife. "They're ruining him." But Luke continued living his life. He went to school but returned to the barn every night, to his goats. He learned to talk to people, but his heart remained with the animals. Who was right? Mary and Benjamin, who believed in harmony with nature, or John, who thought a child should grow up in society? There was no clear answer. Each held to their own opinion. And Luke? He simply lived. Among goats, among people, between two worlds, and perhaps that was what made him unique.